Welcome to the God, You, and Everyone Else podcast. My name is Melanie Thomas, and I'm joined here today with my husband, Torrance Thomas. Today, we're going to be talking about our stories and hoping that it really just speaks to you and encourages you and also gives you an opportunity to get to know us a little better. As we're starting this podcast, it is on our heart that you would be refreshed, that God would speak to you and that you would be encouraged and that you would just be reminded of what matters most is your relationship with God, your relationship with yourself, and then your relationship with everyone else.
Yeah.
So on today's episode, we're going to be sharing our story, and I hope that you guys enjoy it.
Yeah.
All right, Torrance. So let's talk about how did you grow up?
I grew up in Georgia. Corbin, Georgia is the exact place, a small town, country vibes for sure. My mom and dad split when I was around 3 or 4. I don't remember the specific age. And what I do remember is moving around from place to place with my mom and living with my grandparents or with my grandmother, which is her mom, and then us being in a place with her auntie and us being with my great grandma. And then it was just not a stable situation at all. It was rocky. When I was around 8 years old, my grandparents on my dad's side took me in. And from then on, I basically had this ability that, looking back now, I pretty much always needed. I was the only kid in the house. It was me and my uncles. It was about 6 of us in the house. No. 5 of us in the house. My grandma, my granddad, me, my uncle, and my other uncle. So they were, growing up, they were like my brothers to me. I didn't really see them as uncles. They were people that I can talk to about anything. And there were plenty of nights where we would stay up watching movies, eating some popcorn, or just playing Uno, Connect Four, pretty much any kind of board game that you can think about. We played it, and that was pretty cool.
That.
What about you?
I grew up in Central Florida, and my parents, my mom and dad, they're both from Puerto Rico. Ooh. And they got divorced when I was about 6 years old. They had 3 kids together, so it's me and my 2 other siblings. And then my mom quickly got into a relationship with my stepdad. They got married, and then he also brought in 2 kids from his relationship. So it was 5 of us all together. And so growing up, I would go every other weekend to my dad's house and be mainly with my mom. And then my stepbrother and sister, they lived in Puerto Rico, but they would vacation with us and they would take trips to come see us from Puerto Rico to Florida. And so, I remember our family dynamic was very it was blended. So it was kind of a little bit chaotic because there were a lot of kids, but also I just remember it being a lot of fun. My mom always had things planned out for us. It was cool to have 2 Christmases and 2 birthdays and 2 families celebrating us and doing things with us. And I do remember my dad had kind of stricter rules in his household. My mom had strict rules, but it was a little different, the dynamic. So it was, I just remember my childhood being a lot of fun, a lot of structure, and just being very blended, learning how to have those dynamics with step parents and biological parents and all of that.
Yeah. So what was that like for you? When you guys first blended together and all these, new kids started coming into the picture and this whole new dynamic, what was going on emotionally for you during that time period?
Yeah, I think honestly, a lot of it's a blur. I don't remember the emotional aspect of it. I know that I can tell that it deeply affected me because I don't have a lot of memories from that season, if that makes sense. I think because it was divorce, I think is very traumatic for specifically the couple that's going through it, but it does impact the kids a lot.
Yeah.
And I didn't really notice it until I grew up, and now I'm looking back at my childhood, but that it is very damaging to families and especially to the children. But I think I think it was very chaotic at the beginning because as you think about you have a family that's being ripped apart, and then you're having another family being put together.
Yeah.
That wasn't necessarily how it was meant to be, but because of God, He does redeem every story, and He allows things to be restored and things to be redeemed. And so, and we think about how the whole dynamic was. It's we had my mom and bonus dad had 3 kids that lived with them full time. 2 of them didn't live there full time.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of dynamics that play out in that, right? So it's like you have kids that speak Spanish, kids that speak mostly English. You have kids that live mostly with their mom, and kids with has a set of parents, and then you have kids that are bouncing from house to house.
Yeah.
So like all of that, our personalities, our cultural differences, our age differences, all of that, like our personality, everything. Like it was a big task for my parents to kind of manage that.
Yeah.
And then dealing with the other things like buying a home, going to college, and paying child support, all those dynamics that now as an adult, I recognize, oh my gosh, all that stuff was happening at the same time. Yeah. But as a kid, they didn't really let us see that as much, even though we knew some of those things were playing out.
That's so good. I think for me, my mom had me when she was 16.
Yeah.
And I was the only kid from her for like 8 years. And because I was placed with my grandparents, and from what I understand, it was because she wasn't really in a position to take care of me, and she recognized that. And so she wanted to put me somewhere where, she knew I was going to be provided for while she was getting her stuff together, basically. And I started noticing. And I started noticing that she was starting to have more kids. My brothers and sisters started coming to picture, and a part of me felt jealous, right? Like, oh man, they're getting to be with mom, and I'm not. And I kind of started to feel like I was the one being pushed aside, because in my head, I'm like 9, 10 at that point in time. Like, she's having more kids, why can't she just take me and not have more kids? Thinking selfish thoughts like that. And it was a lot to wrestle in my heart. And then, realizing that, seeing my dad on the weekends and kind of questioning, why am I not living with him? He, after they split up, I don't know the time exactly, but he remarried probably like 3-4 years after they split. I remember meeting his wife when I was around maybe 6 or 7-ish. They could have been together before then. I just don't remember the specific timeline or anything like that. Yeah. But I remember meeting her and being like, oh, so he's married. He's starting his whole, new chapter or whatever, and thinking like, am I a part of that? And those are all the feelings that I had to wrestle with as a kid, and that kind of trickled into my adulthood. And it was a lot to handle, for sure.
Yeah. My mom was also 16 when she got married, 16, 17, around that age. She had me a year later after they got married. Yeah. And so very young couple together, having 3 kids, just trying to figure out life and navigate life, and realizing maybe they didn't sign up, what they thought they signed up for wasn't really what they signed up for. Yeah. And just immaturity and all that, and that led them to make that decision. So let's talk about when your experience with God, like, how, did you grow up in church? Did you ever experience God before church? And then like, when was it that you like came to know Jesus?
Okay, so my mom and dad have both been Christians for basically as long as I can remember. My mom always talked to me about God as much as she could. Granted, she still made mistakes, and there are still some things that she had to repent for and like ask God for forgiveness for. We each have our own individual walk. I understand that now. My dad, he kind of the same way. He talked to me about God on the weekends that I would go stay with him. On the first and third Sunday, I believe, he would take me to church with him, and it was small church, like at the most 15 to 18 people, and there was no youth ministry here, right? It was just youth ministry. I was the youth ministry, right? It was pretty much one of those churches that you would go to, and they'd be singing songs like "Way in the Water," like one of those old time songs. I'm like, I can't get into this. I'm sorry. This is what I signed up for, right? And I remember him asking me, do I have a relationship with God, or do I want to have a relationship with God? Do I believe in Jesus? And
I just want to make sure everything is free. It's good.
I know. And I remember thinking to myself, like, why should I believe in Jesus? He's just another man just like me. And you know, at that time being a kid, I thought that just by me doing good things, that would be enough to get me into heaven, and that would be enough to put me in good graces with God.
Yeah.
You know, and being a Christian now and looking back on those thoughts then, I'm like, I was so wrong. Like, the Bible makes it clear, like, nobody gets to the Father except through the Son. And, you know, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only begotten Son, not to condemn it, but to save it, right?
Yeah.
And you know, being a kid and taking that for granted, I kind of felt bad after realizing that. But what about you?
Yeah, I grew up in church. Both of my parents took us to church when we were young. I remember being very young and having experiences with God from a young age. So when I was about 3 or 4 years old, I remember like getting on my knees with my aunt and her teaching me how to pray and talk to Jesus and hear his voice. And there was like a story that like I told my parents, I was like, I'm having a brother. And they were like, well, you need to pray about that. Like, and so I was like, I know I'm having a brother. And then my aunt would be like praying, like begging God, like, please give this girl a brother so that she believes in you. And yeah, and then having memories of being in church and like seeing a scene of like a crucifixion and just like bawling my eyes out because I was experiencing God's presence and I didn't even know really what I was watching. I just remember experiencing God so young, and then making decisions multiple times when I was a kid, like to follow Jesus. But it wasn't until like I was like 15 where I really made that like wholehearted commitment to him, and I was like I'm going to follow you. And it was when I was in a small group and they were sharing the story of Jesus meeting the disciples, and they just like dropped their nets. And it was like something about that story that really inspired me. Like, why would they just drop everything and follow Jesus? Like, he must have been that good. He must have been that amazing.
Yeah.
And like, I want to do that too. And then I remember before that, there was like, you know, I was going through a lot of relational issues. I was really depressed. I was heavier in my weight, and I was really struggling. Emotionally, I didn't really like myself, and I was like, God, if you're real, like I need you to prove it to me, and I need to see these things like happen in order for me to follow you. And all of those things happened. It was like I went to this conference I wanted to go to. Someone paid for it fully. I went on a missions trip. I was like the youngest there. I wasn't supposed to be on that trip, and then someone like told me like God has a purpose for my life, and that didn't even know me, and like had this prophetic word for me. And those all things that I asked for, like that God made happen in a short period of time, that I knew he was real and that he like cared about me. And I remember praying that prayer. I was like, I'm going to pray this prayer in my head. I'm not going to say it to anybody because I don't want anybody like manipulating, like, because you know both my parents were in church. I didn't want them to know, like, and then them like conspiring or something. So I just remember praying this prayer like in my right before I went to sleep one night in my head, and then like all those things happened, and then I eventually like decided to follow him fully, and it was the best decision I've ever made. So yeah, so how did you come to know Jesus?
Well, you know, I want to backtrack to when I was a kid.
Yeah, cool.
It was around a time when I was around 7 to 8 years old, and I was, because of the situation with my mom and dad and being placed with my grandparents and feeling rejected and having all these angry thoughts and emotions that I was going through, I decided to pray, right? And I prayed to God, basically. And I was like, you know what? I just want to feel joy. Like, I just want to feel peace, God. Like, tomorrow when I get up, I want to feel peace. Like, that was my prayer before I went to sleep, that I said to myself, right? And I woke up the next day, and I was just light as a feather, and I was just joyful. And my grandparents even noticed, and it was like, what's gotten into you? My uncle noticed. It was like, whatever you got, I want some of that, right? I'm just like, I couldn't explain it. I didn't know what was happening. I just know that the depression that I felt, the sadness that I was feeling, it was gone, right? The anger was just lifted, and I was joyful. Wow. And I tried to do the next thing the next day, except I didn't pray. I rationalized in my head, not really considering God. I did that, right? Like, I caused myself to feel that way. And when it didn't happen the next day, I quickly realized, like, it wasn't. I couldn't fabricate joy by myself. Wow. Like, but again, like, me being rebellious, I'm like, I didn't, you know, now let's fast forward. I'm like, what, 26 years old, I believe. The age that I really I believe, come to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And from there, I remember leaving my apartment complex and feeling frustrated and angry because I was going through a stressful situation. A part that we didn't share in the introduction was that I have a son from my ex, so you have a stepson.
Yeah, we are married.
We
have a child together.
We have a child together.
We're married for 2 years.
2 years, right? All those.
We didn't say any of those
we
things.
didn't say any of those things. We just got right into the good stuff, right? But yeah. So I was stressed, and I was frustrated, and I was aggravated because I realized how my decisions had led me to where I'm at in life, and I'm just like, man, this isn't good. I can't keep doing what I'm doing. And looking back, I realized that people come to Jesus for one or two reasons, right? Or no, people come to Jesus through one or two ways: through inspiration or through desperation.
So true.
Either you hear a great pastor, or you're around somebody that exemplifies Jesus so that you're like, man, I want to be like that person when I grew up, right? Or like me, you're going through a really tough time and you hit rock bottom, and your rebellion has taken you so far towards, I don't want it to get much worse than this. Like, I gotta do something different. And from that moment, you cry out to God. And I prayed. I remember praying like for 3 specific things: a Puerto Rican wife who would love me and accept me for who I am, having a kid, and who would see the potential that I see in myself and would help me bring it out, right? And like it didn't happen right then. No. At the end of that prayer, I said, God, I will do whatever you want me to do. Whatever you put me on this earth to do, I'll do it. I don't care what it is. And I remember praying that and just surrendering it and feeling like I surrendered myself to God and just forgetting about it. And 2 weeks later, we meet.
Yeah, maybe like our next episode we'll go more into that. Yeah. So we met, and then you joined a small group like right after that.
Yeah.
And it's called Freedom Small Groups. It's out of like Church of the Highlands, Chris Hodges, and our church does it. And so he joined right then, and it was funny because it's like we started dating at the same time as you are also learning how to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And some people might question that, but like it's just our story.
It's just how it happened.
But really, it was like you just fully went into like getting to know God more so than even getting to know. I mean, like we were dating and like getting to know each other, but like you really went in on like seeking God.
Yeah.
And then you like fully went into reading the Bible. You fully started going to church. You got baptized. All these things that you really had an expedited like learning of God and like how to be a Christian and follow Jesus very quickly. But also it was because of your hunger and your desire to learn so fast, which is amazing because I like been able to see that transformation. So yeah, for me, like when I made that decision to follow Jesus, I went from being depressed to having joy.
Wow.
And I went from feeling like I needed love from everything else and getting that love from God, feeling like I couldn't forgive certain people in my life, to being able to forgive them.
Yeah.
And that's like the beautiful thing about Jesus. And also just seeing the favor of God in my life throughout the years, like how he has taken care of my family throughout the years. And there's just so many blessings from God's protection in my life because I have been a Christian my entire life. But it was really when I made a decision for myself, when I started seeing him activated in my personal life more so than like my parents' stories, Yeah. So, yeah, how would you say, what were the significant differences you felt when you like made a full decision to follow Jesus?
Yeah, well, I want to backtrack right quick. What I didn't include in the introduction also was that my dad had me baptized when I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
And I completely forgot about that until
I didn't even know that.
Right now. For some reason, it just blipped out of my mind. And it wasn't, like, I feel like it was one of those things I did because I wanted to please my dad, right? And so that it wasn't really my full decision yet. So let's fast forward back. To answer your question, for me, I think it was more about relinquishing control. Right, like realizing that the way that I was doing things the best way, and that someone knew better than me that someone been who created the entire universe and everything in existence, right?
He knows what he's doing.
Like he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Like he created us for a purpose
Yeah.
and for a reason, and he put people in our paths to help shape our character,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I remember, you know, things that would bother me before coming to Jesus, they just didn't affect me as much in the way that I would respond to certain situations.
Yeah.
It was just, I just had more grace and more understanding of like, oh, this isn't just, you know, this person being like coming after me. This is spiritual at this point. This is something I need to pray about. Just like protection for myself, but protection for the other person as well, because it's spiritual warfare just as much as it is someone coming up to you disrespecting you like on the spot, right? And just humility, right? Like I stopped seeing the things that I did as something so great and just really started focusing on how can I serve, right? Like where can I make the most contribution? And
So good.
I stopped thinking about what can I get and started focusing on what can I give.
That's so good.
Right? Like, because that makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Like you bring around you people who think the same way, and you guys can do so many things together. But if you're around a group of people that only think what can I gain, and you're one of those people too, you're just going to take and take and take, and other resources are going to be dwindled. Like there is no real stewardship and selfishness.
Yeah.
And it took, you know, me coming to God to realize that all of that was in my heart, right?
Yeah.
And let's take it a step further. Like you mentioned forgiveness. I had a lot of unforgiveness in my heart towards my parents because of how things were, and questions unanswered that I feel like are still kind of unanswered, but I'm okay. Like I love them and I want the best for them. We still talk on a regular basis, you know, and that's nice, right? Because God, the Bible says, honor your father and your mother, right? And they did the best that they could with the resources that they had during the time that they were growing up. And let's face it, they were still growing up when I came into the picture. So of course it wasn't going to be perfect.
Yeah.
But it took me, you know, coming to Jesus and humbling myself and kind of almost going through the similar situation to kind of see it from a different point of view. To where like, oh, they were struggling and they were just trying to get by and they had me.
Yeah.
And that just made it harder, right? And so, yeah, all that.
Yeah. Yeah, and then after I came to know Jesus, so wrote, I think that same, I love that you brought up serving others, because I feel like that's also something that happened in my heart. And because of that, I served in my church. I ended up working at a church, and I worked there for 11 years until we got together and had a baby. And now we're in a different season, and it's a new thing that we're in right now. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the season that we're in.
Ooh.
The season that we've been in, and what we're learning from that, and how we can, you know, encourage others that might be in a similar season.
Yeah, so we decided to call this the wilderness season, right? Which
a lot of people call the seasons the wilderness season, like T.D. Jakes and John Revere. They have teachings on the wilderness season.
Yeah, so this isn't,
and it's all through the Bible.
Yeah, this is a new thing at all.
It's not a new concept.
It's just something that we recognize for us.
Yes.
This is where we're in.
Yeah.
Right now, and we just got to be okay with that, right?
Yeah.
And so the wilderness season, simply put, is basically a season where God takes you in circles and shapes your character before He moves you to the next big thing that He's going to have you do.
Yep.
Pretty much. What would you say has been the most impactful for you in this season?
Yeah, I think the wilderness season, it's been tough, because it's like when you want to get somewhere and you're like an ambitious, driven person, the wilderness season, like it just sucks, because like you're trying everything in your power to like get out, but you really can't, because God just has you here for a reason. He's trying to teach you something. He's trying to do deep work in your heart. He's trying to deal with your sin. He's trying to prepare you for something. And we see specifically the story that mainly is like, if you recognize the wilderness, it's like, it's the Israelites. There's so much we can take from that story of Moses taking the Israelites through the wilderness, God testing them, God showing them things. And really the main thing He showed them is like trust me.
Yeah.
Trust me above all else. I am your provider. I am your source. I am your strength. I'm the one you come to when you're dealing with things. You don't go to other things. You come to me.
Yep.
And I feel like that's like the main thing he's taught us in this season is like, come to me, trust me. When there's not money, or we don't see the money for that thing that we
Yep.
need, God provided. You know, when we felt like we needed something emotionally or mentally, like God provided that. And really growing so much more dependent on his word, and because we were lacking physical things, we were lacking emotional or mental things that we desired, God became like that source for us.
Yeah.
And even though the season was difficult emotionally and mentally, and as we conveyed it to others and talked about it,
Yeah.
it was like difficult, and they're like kind of like they didn't get it, or people don't get it, but in our spirit, I feel like it grew us so much more, and like
Yeah.
it matured us. And I'm so grateful for this season because it allowed us to grow deeper with him. What about you?
Yeah. So what I just want to say what got us through that season was just daily time with God,
For sure.
like diving into his word and reading it.
Yeah.
And praying.
Yeah.
Right.
And fasting.
And fasting, right? And not grumbling about
Stopping to complain.
literally
Yeah.
like, because that was like the big thing. Like we can't be grateful if we're grumbling. Like if we're complaining about every little thing that's going
Yeah.
wrong. And there were times where we caught ourselves complaining, and we're like, we got to stop. Like this is a dishonor to God, and this
Yeah.
isn't putting us in the position that we need to be in,
Yeah.
heart wise, to move where he wants us to go next. The more we grumble, the more circles we're going to go in, and we realize that. So we're like, we got to stop grumbling, and we just got to give God thanks for whatever he's doing. Even if we don't know it, we can trust him, right?
Yeah.
And so the biggest impact for me in this season is just, man, I just got to get back to that control. Like it's like,
Yeah, surrender.
I'm not in control, and this is a daily surrender.
Yeah.
Like I'm putting God plan first, and I don't want to say sitting back, but I'm sitting back and doing the work he's putting in front of me, and just trusting that it's gonna be something big.
Yeah.
Eventually, right? And like, what is it? Who dares despise the days of small beginnings? You know, and that's what it feels like right now. A lot of small beginnings.
Yeah.
And it's just challenging because, I mean, you see a penny, you don't really understand how it can be, $1,000, right? It's just a penny. You can't really buy anything with a penny, right? But God can do more with a penny than I can with $10,000. I like to think, right? And yeah, I mean, I think that's it for me. Like just relinquishing control and surrendering, and just trusting him with the little things before he gives me the big things, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a big thing, is learning to surrender.
Yeah.
And like not only like feeling like, because I feel like there's like a grieving process that comes when we surrender, right? Like we have certain things that we desire or dreams that he's put inside of us. And I think, and in the wilderness season, he puts dreams inside of us too.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is where you're going, and the gap between like where you are and where you think he's taking you is huge. And you're like, I have
Yeah.
no idea how I'm going to get there. And it's because like we're not supposed to take ourselves there. Like
Nope.
he's going to help us get there.
Yeah.
But as you follow the track of the Israelites, like he did take them to a place where he was like, okay, now there's your land, there's your territory.
Yep.
Go get it. But they were too afraid. And they didn't because they still didn't fully trust God. But not only that, they didn't trust themselves. They
Yeah.
didn't believe in themselves either.
Yep.
And so now I feel like that's also a thing. Like God wants us to believe in him, but also believing in what he's put inside of us as well.
Yeah.
And having the hope that is going to happen. Whatever the dreams that God has put inside of us, like those things are going to happen. And walking in faith, like Joshua and like, was it Caleb, I think, also in that story? Joshua and Caleb had faith and trust in God. They trusted God wholeheartedly. And I love that. I think I heard a preacher say this, that like Joshua, his name means dog. And like his parents named him dog, which is like so interesting. But like if you think of a dog, like a dog, if he's sleeping, the dog is sleeping and the owner walks away, like the dog's gonna follow you. Like it doesn't matter if he's like half asleep or fully asleep, like he's gonna get up and follow you. And that's like how Joshua was. He was wholeheartedly following Jesus.
Yeah.
So whenever he was going and wherever he moved, I mean, not Jesus, God, whatever you want to say, but he was willing to follow him into that territory.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's like our next like thing is like God is like, okay, now you're moving into this territory, and like I'm gonna take you there, and like trusting him with that as well.
Yeah.
And what he's asking you to do in the next thing. And so yeah, so you had 3 questions you wanted to ask, so I think really good. And I think they're all S's, right?
They're all S's.
Struggle,
stalling, and success.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So what is one thing you've struggled with in this season? Is the first question.
Yeah. I think I really struggled in this season with really trusting God and not worrying. I feel like I worried so much about money for so long in this season and not really trusting and relying on him.
Yeah.
And being content with what he's had provided for us. And once I got to that point where I was like, okay, God, like I'm obviously, nothing I'm doing is getting me to the results that I need or want.
Yeah.
And so I surrendered to you, and I just started thanking him for the little things. And now I don't feel like I'm struggling so much with worry, but it is something that I can easily come back to if I'm not careful with that. What about you?
I think not giving in to selfish ambition for me for sure has been like the greatest struggle, because I've always been able to set a goal for myself and just shoot for it, right? But I feel like the Holy Spirit gave me insight and said, hey, you can set a goal and shoot for it, but what if that takes you away from me?
Wow.
And I was like, where you go, I'll go.
Yeah, like Moses.
Literally, like, I don't want to go anywhere without you. And if what I'm focusing on is taking me away from you, make it known and I'll stop. Right. And so that has been the most difficult thing for me in this season.
Yeah.
And the second question is, what is something that you've been stalling with in this season?
I've definitely been stalling with this podcast. I feel like God has put it on my heart. Well, he put it on my heart 4 years ago. I wanted to start a podcast. I started a podcast. I didn't stick with it. I wasn't disciplined enough. I didn't have a system. I didn't like think through how to do it. And because like sometimes I feel like when God speaks to me, he tells me something and I just like go for it. And I don't really think it through. And then I didn't fulfill what he had for me.
Yeah.
But then I feel like he brought it back into my heart this year. And it's been a process of like, okay, God, like what is the name of my podcast? What's the heart behind it? Like, what do you want me to do? And also like, how am I actually going to do that? Like, what is the equipment I need to buy? Like, what are the things I need to know? But you can keep listening to things and reading things and never actually start something.
Yeah.
And so there's been so many things that have like been like an easy excuse not to start it. But we're finally here and like we've pushed through it. We're doing it.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've definitely stalled on starting this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
I think for me, just creating content and writing, right? Like basically battling the feelings of not feeling like I'm good enough, right?
Yeah.
Same with Moses again. Like he didn't think he was good enough.
Yeah.
It was like my brother Aaron, or was it his cousin? I can't remember. Was it his cousin or his brother? Yeah, his brother Aaron was a much better speaker than he was. It's like, God, have him speak for me instead, right? But God was like, I want to do it through you.
Yeah.
But Moses insisted that Aaron would do it. God allowed it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that inadequacy is what I've been battling. I feel like we talked about this the other day.
Yeah.
That the uncertainty we see in the future is a reflection of the uncertainty we have of what God is saying. And I feel like when God says something, we just need to believe it the first time and not have to be like, God, is that really you saying that? And I feel like I've personally gotten into the habit of questioning if the things that God put in me is really the things he put in me.
Yeah.
And because of that, I doubt the gifts and I don't fully use them. And so I've been stalling with writing, with creating content and putting it out there. And the last question is, what is something that you've been successful at in this season?
I feel like I'm like right now getting better at this. But just getting more consistent. Yeah. And I have a 16-month-old. He's about to be 16 months. And I feel like I'm just adjusting to being a first-time mom with my own child, being a stepmom, and all of that dynamic, having my own business.
It's a big change.
And starting a podcast and doing all these things that I feel like God's put in my heart to do. Working out again, trying to get healthy, and all these things that he's put in my heart. And like, I feel like it's been hard to get in that rhythm and to get in that mental space. And I feel like I finally like gotten there.
Yeah.
And just not making excuses. Okay, like, you know, you missed a workout yesterday, you missed something yesterday. Okay, like pick it up today or pick it up later. And okay, he's not napping right now. Like, okay, well, like, you know, figure it out. Like, you know, there's a way that you can get things done and make things happen, that make your goals happen, even when you have kids, even when you have other things at play.
Yeah.
And just navigating that, navigating being a wife, navigating still being a mom and a daughter and all these other roles that I have, and just showing up consistently in the things that God's put on my heart.
Yeah.
And also saying no to things that other people want me to do that doesn't really fit in the season that I'm in right now. Yeah. What about you?
I think for me, it's definitely just spending time with God. Like, I've switched jobs in the last, 9 months to 10 months. I switched jobs again. And it was almost getting to the point where I wasn't really in the work that much, right? I wasn't able to spend that time that I had in the morning because of the earlier or whatever time that I had to be at work. And that affected me on a level that was like, whoa, I really need that time, right? And so I basically had to get up earlier. and that's been challenging, but it's definitely helping, and I'm able to, you know, self-reflect and read the Bible and do a little bit of writing in the morning to start my day winning, which matters a lot. But just pivoting, right? Like every season is going to offer a new routine, and just figuring out what that routine is that's going to help you be successful. And I think I've been successful at figuring that out in the last season and this season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all we have for you guys today. Thank you so much for listening. If you listened this far, we want to say thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you want to join us on the journey, hit that subscribe button or follow us on all of the podcast platforms. Follow us, like the video if you're watching on YouTube. And also, if you're on YouTube or any of the podcast platforms, if you would like to join my weekly devotional, it's for women. It also is going to update you on when we have new podcast episodes. Go ahead and follow that. Go to that link and register. And we will see you guys next week. And next week, we're going to talk about our story, how we met, and how God brought us together, and just share that with you guys, and our advice for single people that are dating, getting engaged, and what we would tell you. What would you what would we encourage you to do as you're going through that process? So thank you so much for listening to God, you, and everyone else. We look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Freedom over fame. Freedom over fame. The cycle stays the same. Freedom over fame. Freedom over fame. Freedom over fame. The cycle stays the same. Freedom over cycle stays the same.